All right, good afternoon, everybody.
Good
We still have a
afternoon.
Hey, Dr. Asade. There she is. I'm so excited. Oh, I guess I should turn my camera on so everybody can see where I am too. Hey, here we are. It is so great to see you. So great to see you. And I'm so excited for my students to have the chance to talk to you and get to know more about you and get to know just how I just made a Facebook post about you, just how great you are at melding so many different things from being a composer to a lyricist and a playwright and a scholar and a singer and a performer. Everything, all those things are just you embody all of that so wonderfully, and it's so important that our singers here and our students get to know people who are out here doing these types of things and making it work during the pandemic and pre-pandemic. But also just want to make sure I'm introducing them to just fantastic people, and I think you're just a fantastic person. So, without because Dr. Asade has to leave right at 12:50, and I want to be sure that we get as much time as possible learning from her and hearing about all the wonderful experiences that have made her who she is. So, without further ado, I'd like to welcome to our Zoom and to our YouTube live audience, Dr. Masi Asade. Welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Fox. I'm so happy to be here. It's nice to see all of your smiling faces. I know everyone is zoomed out. My students are zoomed out, but we are still doing the thing, and it's really nice to be here with all of you today.
Yeah, awesome. So I'm just going to jump on in. So tell us about you. Tell us a little bit about your path, how you got to where you are, what you're doing right now, so that we can get to know a little bit more about you.
Sure. So, I was thinking about this before I came in today. Can you hear me okay? Is the audio all right?
Yeah, this
Okay,
sounds
good.
good.
Just wanted to check. Because I know that you all are musicians and choral people. And I was like, oh man, I'm going to fail at this because I feel like it's all the same thing for me. For me, a dramatic choice is a musical choice, is a choice in the world of ideas. So I don't always draw a distinction between the work I do as a composer and the work I do as a dramatist. If I'm writing a play, if I'm writing a musical, if I'm writing a score, or if I'm writing a scholarly article that brings together some ideas that I have about and some research about why we sing in different ways and what we believe about our voices. So I do all of those things. I guess for me, it always comes back to vocal practice. I feel like everything comes back through vocal practice for me. Um, I grew up in central Pennsylvania. I went to college outside of Boston. I started out as a music and English major. And then there was one semester where it was like all Chaucer and European motets. And I was like, can I get a little something else from around the world here? And so I made up my own major in a field called performance studies, which is kind of like cultural studies and performing arts. That is a field that has been very good to me. I went on and got my master's and my PhD in that field as well. I really did not want to become an academic. I wanted to be an artist. I come from a family of academics. Everyone in my family is a professor. It's a little bit embarrassing. I went into the family business. Both
Yeah.
of my parents were the first in their family to go to college, and they both got PhDs, and here we all are. So I think I work in the theater. I think that's the main thing to know about me. I began way back in the day as a performer, which is how I know Dr. Fox. And I,
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
I contemplated bringing some embarrassing photos, but I did not.
It was
um,
years ago. I don't know the exact number, but years ago, we were in a summer stock production of Ragtime.
that's right.
God, I loved it. It was great for me.
It was a really fun summer.
Yeah.
Yeah, and some of those people have gone on to great acclaim, starred
Yeah.
on Broadway and the
Yeah.
West End. It was a great company. But anyway,
Exactly.
so I work in the theater. I think that's enough about me. I could ramble on more, but I think I'll stop there.
Well, I love always getting. I love for them to know as much about people and the different lived experiences that are represented across this field of, I guess, the arts or whatever, or even just in academia. Because here in Nebraska, in particular at our school, even our faculty is working on being more diverse. But part of the speaker series, I call it Reflections of Us, so
Mhm.
that people can see, hopefully, in some of the speakers that we've had, who they are or something, or a job that they want to be or do down the road, and they can see lots of different people doing these things. Dr. Sade also has a wonderful podcast that she allowed me to join, and it's just fantastic stuff, and just a mixture of all kinds of things that I really think is important. So I want to be sure, maybe if you have a link or something, maybe I can put that in the chat, or maybe you can put that in the chat. I want them to get to know more about your work, because I think it's important across all of, I should say, know all of your work, because you're not doing just one thing. You're doing so many wonderful things. So let's get into these questions. So how have you persevered musically through the pandemic? What's kept you kind of going?
Yeah, I was thinking about this because you sent me all these questions, thankfully, although I shouldn't admit that because then it'll be clear that I didn't prepare enough. But I will say that for the very first week that I was isolating of the pandemic, I could not sing. And that has never happened to me before. I've I just couldn't sing. And it took me quite some time to be able to write music. I think, there was just so much uncertainty, and there still is, that my creative practices had to change. And so starting the podcast was kind of part of that too. I started first going back to some songs that I had written some time ago that I thought might be encouraging to people, and went in and I'm not from the Instagram, TikTok generation. Like, I'm not good at or confident at making videos of myself playing and singing, but I felt, I was so fortunate. I was employed. I had my piano delivered to my apartment the day before I started isolating. I had food to eat. I was relatively safe. I felt like it was my responsibility to encourage if I could. And so I started recording these sort of quarantine solos. And from that, I did end up being able to write some original songs. At first, it was kind of going back to songs I had written, maybe some of them songs that had been cut from shows, like didn't actually make it to the final show, and I would kind of rewrite it a little bit to fit the way I was feeling today. And then I think right around the time, Dr. Fox, that you and I spoke, I was invited to do a concert, a live stream. I was very nervous. I had to get all this equipment to be able to do this correctly, and it was for this great theater in New York called Rattlestick Theater, and they said, we're doing this concert called New Songs Now. And I had been in this concert before, and you're supposed to bring new songs, and I was like, I don't have any new songs, right? I don't have any, and I was so agitated about it. And then there was so much going on in the world with the murder of George Floyd, and the sort of just outcry, and sort of so many emotions around that. And that was when I was able to write my very first song during the pandemic. I wrote a song called From Then, which is about how we might feel. It's actually interesting to talk about it now, because it's about how we might feel looking back in time at that moment, and what we did, and how we behaved, and what we chose. And so the song is called From Then. So that was my first song that I was able to write. Then I was able to write a few more songs that were specific to how I was feeling. One that a lot of people responded to is called New Dreams Are Coming.
Mm-hmm.
And then what else did I just started getting asked to do, like, some virtual plays and things. And then we did do a reading. I did do a virtual reading of a new musical that I'm working on.
Oh,
I'm writing lyrics for a musical called Monsoon Wedding. It's an amazing musical. It's supposed to be in London last year, but there was a pandemic. But
don't be modest. Tell us about that, because
okay.
that's a huge thing, because
Yeah,
it's international, right? And I think it's
absolutely.
pretty significant.
Yeah. It's based on a really beautiful film by an Indian filmmaker, Mira Nair, that was a hit film in 2001. It won all these awards internationally. It's about these two families coming together in Delhi for the wedding of this bride and groom, and sort of all the shenanigans that happen. All kind of secrets come out, and there are lots of. It seems like maybe it won't happen, and then it happens, and there's lots of dancing. So I'm a lyricist on that project. The composer is a Bollywood legend. In
Wow.
fact, there are so many artists on this project that are just major figures in Indian arts and culture. And so we were supposed to be in London last year, and we were going to do a workshop just about this time last year to prepare it for production. And we just pushed it off. So in September 2020, we all got online, and we did a virtual workshop of a new musical, which means we tested out new songs. We
Wow.
went through the entire script. There were actors zooming in from Mumbai, from New York. I'm here in Chicago, so it was an entire Zoom adventure. And of course, we had to pre-record all of the songs in order
Hmm.
to kind of read through it and hear what it was in time. So even though I'm a lyricist on that project, part of what I love about it is I get to do a lot of musical work. I work really closely with the orchestrator, Tony Award winning orchestrator of a beautiful musical called The Band's Visit, which I really
Yeah.
recommend if you don't know
Yeah.
that one.
Yeah.
So I worked really closely with Jamshid, the orchestrator, and Vishal Bharadwaj, the composer. And so I actually sang on a lot of the demos, right? I would be up late at night singing all 14 parts of all the vocal lines so that the actors would then know how to record their parts. So we did that. And right now I'm doing, I did another live stream. I wrote a couple original songs for a musical commission that I have about this virtual pop star, this holographic pop star. I'm writing a musical about that. And then coming up right now, I'm contributing some original music to a virtual reading of a play from 1935 by the Harlem Renaissance playwright Zora Neale Hurston,
Uh-huh.
who's
Yeah.
often known for the for the book Their Eyes Were Watching God.
Mhm.
And she wrote this play in 1935 that has a lot of music in it, but we couldn't find all of the music. Like some of them are folk songs, and so there are some places where there's just lyrics or it just kind of says they sing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I wrote a few more songs for that, and did also I'm working with percussionists because there's a whole voodoo conjure scene. Anyway, so that's going to be streamed virtually next month.
Wow. See, I
So
told you. I mean, just listening to what you've already described. I mean that pulls from so many different skills and knowledge bases. It's just, I mean, it's fascinating to be. I can't imagine being a lyricist. I just, trying to do that and then writing and working with percussionists and working with orchestrators. I mean, that takes a lot of education, I guess I would say, for lack of a better word right now, but it takes a lot of different skill sets to be able to come together and not just be okay at, but to be confident and, have mastered it at such a level that you're okay jumping in and out of these these conversations, or I can't think of the right. This is why I'm not a lyricist, because I
yeah,
can't put together
no, you're
right
good. Come
now.
on,
But so
come on.
how did you feel like your background, your training, your education, your life experience has helped you do these different jobs? Because I'm
Yeah.
sure some of them are knowledge based, like you have to know some things about music, but
Mhm.
some of the things are not learned in the book. Being able to communicate with people, how do you feel like you were prepared to do that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I was thinking, especially when you were saying earlier to sort of say who I am, I probably should have said a little bit more about where I come from culturally. So I'm mixed race. My dad is from Ghana in West Africa. My mom is working class from California, white working class. So I already have a lot of things going on. Like that's kind of normal for me to have
Hmm.
a lot of family members and a lot of different kind of perspectives in the air and
Hmm.
figure out how to move between those. I'm also the middle child, and we might have some middle children out there. So I feel like I kind of just grew up with this experience of being a kind of a translator or mediator, that's part of my personality.
Oh,
So
yeah.
I would say that. I also think, there have been a lot of times in my life where people are just like, that's a lot of stuff, Masi. Like you have a lot going on. And I just have had to learn to be okay with that. That I didn't neatly fit into anybody's box of like, you are this kind of person. I'm like, well, I'm doing this and I'm doing that, and
Mhm.
I did the things that brought me joy. And you're absolutely right. There are skill sets that translate across them. And one of them that I really do value, especially when I'm working with other artists, is being able to communicate
Mhm.
clearly and honestly. And that's, sometimes you do get some of that in school, but like as with so many artistic abilities, it's just practice. You just have to
Mhm.
practice it. And even just this week, I had a conversation with the collaborator because we'd had a meeting last week, and I was like, I really didn't feel good about that meeting after it was over, and I didn't feel like we were communicating well. I didn't really like the tone of voice, and I'm not really sure what happened. It was a hard phone call for me to make, right? But I felt like it was important, and a mentor also encouraged me to make that phone call to say, don't let these things fester. Like, and we were able to talk it out and say, you know what, we actually came into that meeting with really different expectations about the project.
Mhm.
Some of the people had this expectation, and I had this expectation, and that's why we weren't really clicking. But if we didn't sort of express this doesn't feel right or I'm not sure about this, then we wouldn't get to that point where then we can actually proceed
Yeah.
with hopefully more harmony. And I should say I really appreciate that too in teaching in students. I always appreciate the students that says I didn't understand that. Like, can you explain that? Or I kind of understand that, but did you mean this? I love it when people ask that because it means that's part of the actual work
Hmm.
is making sure that we understand each other. I mean, that's the whole work. Professor Fox, that's the work of this country. We are not understanding
Yeah,
each other. So
right,
how
exactly.
can we communicate? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that I've always been so. I think that you have just whenever I've since we've known each other and been able to keep up with each other online and things, and just watching you weave in and out of these. I know you used to do some grant writing or something at NYU, and watching you do that and be successful at that, and then you were still. I think you might have been still writing Sympathy Jones or workshopping or something was going on during that time with. And I know you were talking about performances of it, so my timeline might not be
Mhm.
right, but I've seen you doing several things and being successful at that. And that's, that's, I just think that's wonderful because sometimes I think just like in high school, we hear that your next step has to be college. And then your next step after college has to be this career. But I feel like you have carved out the path that has spoken to you, and you're doing the things that have spoken to you. And I just want our students to see that because right now
Mhm.
you're teaching at a university, but I don't know if you even talked about that not necessarily being your end goal, or I'm not even sure if you can tell us maybe where
What
you
is my
saw
end goal?
yourself. But I just see
Hmm.
you just doing so many of these things at such a wonderful level. So I think it's important to point that out because we can sometimes want to pigeonhole people like you need to do this and you need to do
Hmm.
that and this is going to be your job when you get this degree. Just like when we're in music, you got a degree in this, now you need to go do this, and that's your whole life. And you just have done so many things so well, and I wanted to make sure
Hmm.
to point that out. Um, so we've talked a
Thank
little
you.
bit about your work as a lyricist and things, and I hate the question. I haven't asked anybody yet because people
Okay.
are like, "What's your process in writing a
Oh,
song?" But I love the songs that you write. So
thank
what
you.
inspires you? Instead of asking you about your process, I'm going to ask you what inspires you or has inspired you to be a composer, arranger, lyricist, all the other things we've talked about so far.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about process too. I love talking about process, but I think I don't know. I mean, I can remember being 8 years old and saying and being asked, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" and saying, "I'm going to be a composer." Not like, "Oh, what did I know?" I was taking piano lessons, and I knew that I liked making up little songs. And I think my dad on my dad's side, there actually are a number of composers in the family. Like some of my great uncles are kind of major figures in Ghanaian music. And sort of, if you read the history books, and so, and my grandfather, I never met my dad's parents, they passed before I was born, but my grandfather on my dad's side was an organist, and on my mom's side in Appalachia, they say that my great grandmother had a beautiful singing voice. So I claim all of it. But I had heard that there was such a thing as a composer, and I sort of thought, well, maybe I'd like that. I like music. I like making music. So I thought that's what I wanted to do. I think it didn't really occur to me that I didn't really know any female composers. Although I will say I do remember going to see I had a friend, I lived in Pennsylvania, I had a friend that every year for her birthday, she got to take a friend of hers to go see a Broadway musical.
Mm-hmm.
And I was fortunate to be that friend on two occasions. How else would I have seen a Broadway musical? And one of the show we saw Les Mis. That was my first Broadway musical, and we saw The Secret Garden, which the music is by Lucy Simon, right, Carly Simon's
Mm-hmm.
sister, and that did make a big impression on me. I remember buying the songbook and seeing her photo, and seeing that she had written the music for that musical. So maybe in some sense I did know pick up on that. But I feel like so to a large extent, it wasn't until later in life that I encountered people just kind of not expecting me to write music.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
I remember being like in my early 20s and being in New York, going to a rehearsal at Ripley Greer Studios, which is a lot of the Broadway shows rehearsed there, but anybody can book a studio for an hour. And I was rehearsing some show or something. And I was in the elevator riding up, and someone said, this was some time ago, but someone said, are you a dancer? And I was like, no, I'm here to rehearse the show I'm writing. And then they were like, oh, are you a lyricist? And I was like, no, I'm a composer. Like it took a lot of steps to get to the point where people would think that I was someone that had also written the music because
Hmm.
it just didn't fit their expectations. So I have encountered that, but I think I don't even really know how to say why this is what I want. I think even from the time I was a teenager, I had a lot. I seem to have like too many feelings. I seem to have too many feelings, and music was a place to really express them. I don't really know how else to say it. And even now, I have a half written song. I've sort of slowed down on some of the
Hmm.
pandemic quarantine solos, but sometimes I'll just have like a rush of feeling that day. And I now know that that means that there was something I need to express and I need to sit down and figure out what it is. Yeah.
Cool. You kind of led right into this next question. I'm just fascinated by your research in the racial history and contemporary music and theater performance, and I want to talk more about that so that our one of the things that well, there are two things. One of my favorite things, one of the classes I have sketched out already in my mind is I want to teach a class about black women singers and
Ooh,
their role in the development of R&B and pop and soul and music. I already have my artists picked out. I have everything ready to go. I just need to put it together. And so it brought me back to this idea of one of the things we're struggling with now with theater and schools doing theater, because we'll have some people in here who are going to be teachers, and they're struggling with trying to find musical theater pieces that don't that aren't that well, aren't full of stereotypes.
yeah.
And there are some racial things, there are some gender things, there are just some things that were never addressed, and they're a reflection of their time. But when you put them into this context that we have now, we find now that they're really quite problematic. And
Mhm.
so I think this topic of racial history and contemporary musical theater and performance is very fascinating and very important. And can you talk to us about that? What does it mean for you in your work, this topic? And I just want to know more, and I want our students to know more.
Yeah. Okay. So how are we going to get into this? I want to mention, first of
Big
all,
question.
for your class, there's a great new book, and I haven't read it yet, but one of the scholars I really admire in this field is a scholar named Daphne Brooks. And she has a new book out called Liner Notes for the Revolution that is all about Black female singers and pop artists. And there just might be something useful for you there. It's on my reading list, and she's brilliant. And she does a lot of music journalism too. She's kind of whenever I go to the pop music studies conferences, she's in that scene. So I think, yeah, yeah. I was reflecting, recently. I was like, oh, you know what song I used to always have in my audition book was "My Lord and Master" from The King and I. Like that was actually in my audition book, and I think about it now. I'm like, what I would never recommend a student sing that at an audition, right? Like she's like the concubine, it's like not from so many perspectives, from Me Too, from colonial, post-colonial theory, from so many perspectives. I'm not going to recommend that song. And actually a student just told me that The King and I is banned in Thailand, which is interesting, right?
Really? I
So
didn't
kind of
know that.
just thinking
Wow.
about it from a global perspective, already our perspective is going to shift in terms of
Mhm.
what's viable. Um, I think I think a couple things. So how am I gonna address this? First of all, I track, that's not a great word. I follow and support the work of rising artists of color in my field. And I'm happy to rattle off a whole list of names of people who are writing new musicals that I think are exciting. Rona Siddiqui, Afghan American, part of her family is from Afghanistan and part of her family is like Italian American, right? Has brilliant, brilliant writer. Um, Ben Velez, who's writing the new music for the new John Leguizamo musical. There's a whole
Wow.
bunch of Latinx musical theater writers that are rising and really amazing. I have a number of South Asian students. I'm actually organizing a master class right now. I have
Wow.
auditions this afternoon for my composer, Vishal Bardwaj, to come and coach vocal performance for students singing our monsoon wedding songs because they require a lot of vocal techniques. Some of them require facility with Indian classical improvisational techniques. So I'm happy to recommend lots of people that I think you should follow. I was just
I
a part
want
of
that.
a, okay, yeah, well, so
Send
we'll
it
we'll
my
follow up
way.
on that.
Okay.
I was just a part of a concert. I had a couple songs in a concert that a colleague put together at SUNY New Paltz called Getting Up is Easier to Do. And I think she teaches in the theater department, Katya Stanislavska, and she pulled together with exactly the same impulse a bunch of songs by writers from many, many different backgrounds, including my friend Michael R. Jackson, who just won the Pulitzer Prize for his musical A Strange Loop, a really amazing
Oh,
story about a Black and queer artist. You got to be ready for it. It's
yeah.
strong stuff, but it's brilliant. So yeah, so that's one thing is I support the work of new artists in the field. I also support the work of artists who are not as well known. Kirsten Child, one of the very few Black women composers and writers of musicals. She's in a wonderful musical called The Bubbly Black Girl Sheds Her Chameleon Skin. She's
Mm.
another musical called Bella. Some really amazing numbers in that show about identity, and sort of a really great choral number, a trio, which is a trio. I'm grasping at straws here for the chorus. It's a trio between three Black women that's really lovely. Um, I also would honor sort of in my line, right? Mickey Grant,
Mhm.
who had a hit musical in the late 1970s called Don't Bother Me, I Can't Cope. She won a Grammy Award for that musical. It had a huge successful tour. Who talks about these shows? I didn't learn
No.
about these shows. I didn't learn about these artists. So that's part of honoring the history. I want to honor those who've come before me. I don't want it to make, I don't want to make it seem as though um, those of us who are, you know, fighting in some ways for recognition are part of a longer story, right? And I always want to honor that. Even at Northwestern, I've started a speaker series this year called the Kelsey Farr Jr. Speaker Series, which brings musical theater artists of color to
Mhm.
campus to speak with students. And we named it after one of the very first alums of Northwestern, Black alums to go on to success in musical theater. This is like the 1930s, right? He started in
Wow,
the
the
student written show
1930s?
and went on to do 4 Broadway shows, toured in the 1950s with a singing group. So the history is there if you look for it. You know what I mean? But it requires looking for it and then remembering that we are a part of that story. It didn't just start today when our awareness began. So that's part
Oh,
of why it's interesting to me. Now, in terms of how we are going to think about the past, I think when I teach musical theater history, which it's always a fun adventure when Masi teaches musical theater history because I like to shake it up a little bit. Um, I kick off the course with minstrelsy, with the study of minstrelsy. And I begin with one of the most successful Black minstrel artists, Black African American, actually, he actually was Caribbean American, he's from Bahamas,
Mhm.
performers who performed in blackface, right? Black man performing in blackface was
Yeah.
profoundly successful, Burt Williams. And I
Yep.
start the course that way because I think it's important to understand the complexity. We can't just jettison parts of our history and say blackface was bad, it didn't exist, let's find new things. We have to respect the fact that it informed all of the music that came after, right? Minstrel performance informed all of musical theater. We can talk about that. And also was a means to success, right? On the terms of their own time period for
Yeah.
some Black artists.
Hmm.
That's a complex idea to hold in your head. It's not just cancel or don't cancel. I'm sorry. I always tell my students I feel like anyone Gen X and above shouldn't even be allowed to use that word. But I think it's we have to be able to live with the complexity, right? That two things are happening at once. There's a derogatory performance of Black people, and there's a Black man who's rising to profound international stardom by
Hmm.
using, those performance strategies. Burt Williams starred in the Ziegfeld Follies. He integrated Ziegfeld Follies. Most of the white stars said that they would leave. Florenz Ziegfeld said, I can replace everyone else except for him, and he's staying in. But it was written into his contract that he would not be sharing the stage at the same time as the white Ziegfeld girls, right? So, I mean, this is our history. We have to know it. And it plays out to this day, right? So I don't, the way I teach musical theater history and the reason that I think it's important to know is because it's not done. It's not in the past. It's informing what we're living now, and it's informing the choices that we're going to make. When we know the history, then we decide how are we going to conduct ourselves in relation
Hmm.
to that history.
Hmm. Oh my gosh. Oh my goodness. I could just, ooh, we don't even have enough time to
Mm,
continue to talk like I want to talk to you because we struggle with some things in the choral world too that we have that
yep.
are very similar to that. I talk a little bit about minstrelsy in one of my choral literature classes that I teach,
Mm,
but I don't think it's a part of anybody's standard history that they will get as a part of the history of music when you go through the Western European inspired music courses that tend to permeate music programs around the country.
Mhm.
So I better leave that topic because I could just keep going and going and going. I want to learn some more about you. So you're involved in all this stuff, and one of the things there's been a through line, I guess is the right word, for all everybody is trying to figure out how do you handle the syndrome. I
Oh.
think it's something that we all have, and I know particularly now during the pandemic when we are we're alone more and we're forced to maybe be online more, but we also know that the things that people put up online are not necessarily a reflection of what's happening in their lives, and you compare yourself to that. And so the imposter syndrome is real. How do you handle that, and how has it manifested itself in the work that you do?
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned social media because I am taking a little bit of a social media fast at the moment, which you may have noticed, Dr. Fauci. But
Yes.
I'm probably going to come back. I've been reading the book Digital Minimalism, which I highly recommend. Because you're absolutely right. It isn't real. And also there are corporations that have spent vast amounts of money to make us feel like we should just spend time
Yeah.
pretending what our life is like on those platforms. The imposter syndrome is so real. I have seen some really interesting things recently about how we, I haven't prepared this. This is going to be messy, but here we go. How we should pay attention to the fact that sometimes the problem is not just with us. Sometimes there are systemic things happening that are making us feel smaller
Yeah.
than we are because of, I don't know, for gendered reasons, for, I don't know, heteronormative reasons, for racialized reasons, whatever it may be, ableist reasons. There may be systemic things that are
Yeah.
making us feel like you're not good enough. And the answer to that may not just be more confident, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But so all of that said, with that disclaimer, I do think everyone feels in different moments, I'm not up to this challenge. Everyone's going to find out soon. I feel that way all the time. I think, how do I deal with it? I now know that it will pass.
Hmm.
So I have confidence that it will pass, especially when I'm feeling just low, low, low. I'm like, it's gonna pass. I try to have a sense of humor about it. That helps. If I'm really not doing well, I sometimes do this thing where I will write down this. I've been telling a lot of people this, so I will share with you in case I'll write down all of the things that I'm thinking about myself. This song is not good enough. No one's ever gonna like it. You're not talented. Ooh, great things to live with. And then I will rewrite them. This song is getting better with every rewrite.
Yeah.
I know that this song may not please everyone, but it will find its audience, right? It doesn't matter if I think I'm talented as long as I keep doing the work. And so if I talk back to the things that are giving me negative messages, then I can usually get through. The other
Oh,
thing I would
oh, that is so God, that's such good advice, and I'm so glad that I can come back to this, and I might just take that little snippet and put it on my phone because I deal with imposter syndrome as well, and
Mhm.
so I just wanted to say that in that moment because that you just spoke a little something into my life right there. So I'm gonna let you keep going. That is
No, I mean
great.
it's not solved, right? Like there's you never solve that, right? It's never done. There's always somebody around to tell you don't know enough.
Yep.
Especially working as a writer and composer. Sometimes I'm the sole author of a musical, right? I wrote the story, I wrote the lyrics, the script, the lyrics, and the music. And then when it comes time for rehearsal, everybody's coming at me with feedback. Everybody wants something to be shifted. I'm the only person. And so and I have to say, I did get this advice from Kirsten Childs. I'm going to give her that respect, the Black female composer of musicals that I mentioned. And she also writes book. We call the script of a musical the book. She also writes book music lyrics. And you really have to trust yourself. You have to have some deep belief in the value of your own ideas because everybody wants you to change.
Hmm.
And I guess that actually speaks to the next thing I was going to say, which is I have learned to proactively reach out to mentors. And I think I mentioned this too because it looks like we may have a number of female identifying students on this call. And this is something that, especially as female people in the world, we are not always taught to do. We are sort of told, well, if you're good enough, someone will pick you. Like these like crazy messages we inherit, right? So you have to ask. You have to ask for help. You have to ask the people you admire for their advice. And that is, there's no substitute for that because they've been through it before and they know and they have perspective, right? I just had a call with someone earlier this week where I was like, I'm stressed about this situation. Can you talk it through with me? You have to ask. And I remember I was fortunate to be mentored by, I mean, I have gotten some things that people just said, you're going to be mentored by this person. I'm very
Mhm.
grateful. One of those people is Janine Tesori, one of our most successful
Oh.
female composers of musicals. She wrote the musical Fun Home. She
Hmm.
wrote Caroline or Change. She wrote Thoroughly Modern Millie, which some of you may know,
Yeah.
and Violet and Shrek, the Broadway
Really? Oh,
musical.
I didn't know that.
So, and Janine is amazing. She takes no nonsense from anybody. And I think that she has mentioned that no female composers ever asked, maybe up until, maybe this has changed recently, but up until very recently, had ever asked her to mentor them. Many male identifying composers had, and no female composers had. So I just mentioned this that because we have to ask. We have to ask for the mentorship and the guidance and the support that we want. And there's nothing wrong with that. And it will only make you stronger.
Oh man. Oh, we're gonna run out of time. Ugh. So okay, I'm gonna maybe ask you just a couple more questions. I know we have a list, but I want our students to be able to ask you some questions and interact with you.
Sure.
So this one I'll ask now is, what would you say to undergraduate Masi that would have prepared her for what the work you're doing right now? What advice would
Yeah, such a good question. I was thinking that I might tell her to join a band, right? I think she was a little too shy to do anything like that. That would have been really good for her. Something again where a lot of learning happens not in the classroom, not in the setting with the printed music. I'm actually teaching a vocal performance class right now where we're
Mhm.
going through a lot of different pop vocal styles, and I make the students learn without sheet music. They have to learn from the recordings, and everyone is like, "There's no music. What am I going to do?"
Ah,
Right? So, but just that sense of like being shaken up a little bit, and it doesn't mean it's not specific, it doesn't mean it's not technical, it doesn't mean that it's not full of really specific and meaningful artistic choices, but to be able to do that on your feet and in different ways, that would have been good for me. I have a lot of conversations with students right now about something that I don't think I realized, which is that what you do in the first year after graduation is not make or break, especially right
mhm.
now with the pandemic, right? I have so many students that are so agitated. I was just talking to a student yesterday who was like, I don't know if I should move to New York. Like, I want to be an actor, but the Chicago scene, I don't know. I was like, listen, the theaters are closed. Like it's going to take some time for this entire industry to figure out what it wants to be now. The whole thing is going to change. So if you move to New York in 6 months, if you move in a year, it's not like you've ruined your life, right? I also always give this suggestion. This is not very specifically about moving to New York, but whatever. I get a lot of questions about that. And maybe this is applicable to other things, that it's not all or nothing. You don't have to sort of say, like, I've sold all my worldly possessions and I've moved to New York. Like, you can get a 1 month sublet and check it out, and see, do you have friends there in New York and LA, wherever you might want to go? Those are our centers for theater and acting, and music to some extent, although there are many hubs for music as well. But you can test the waters. It doesn't have to be like, I've made my final decision and that's it. So I don't think I necessarily knew that. I remember in my senior year of college, there was one night where I stayed up all night and I was writing music, and I was like, how could I ever have a day job that would not allow me to spend all night writing music? Right? Let me tell you, I haven't had a day job for many years, and it's all worked out. So
That's great.
yeah.
That's great. Oh man. So what has made someone a great colleague to and for you?
Yeah, I think communication skills are important. Now, that said, people communicate in very different ways. So
Mm.
I also have sometimes to just be open to communicating in different ways. But I think someone who's aware of how they communicate and when they are or aren't getting their message across, that's really helpful. I think also just, this only occurs to me right now, I think just kindness. It's nice to work with people who are kind. And to be honest, this is really true for artists. If you are not kind to other people, it probably means that you're not very kind to yourself as an artist. It's
Mm.
very hard to write and to work and express if you're not generous to yourself and what you're able to do in different moments. So I think, I find that I'm hopping all over the place here, but I find that the artists that give the most meaningful feedback are the ones who themselves face the fear of looking at the blank page and thinking, what
Hmm.
am I going to put on it? Because that's humbling. And so if one can be humble enough and kind enough to oneself to, go through that kind of moment, one can also be equally humble and kind in one's relationships.
That's so spot on. Kindness is such a big thing, and it's not always as present as it should and needs to be in these spaces when
Yeah.
we're trying to work with people. Especially when our lived experiences may be so different from each other. Figuring out how to be kind. So this is a little more personal. So what do you listen to when you're not listening to things that your own music or maybe the things that are related to your job? You can see here we have a little bit of Lena Simone up here in our
Oh,
office, some wonderful pictures. I think this is Dr. Dre. Yeah.
yes.
Um, so and the students, I have hype songs that I listen to on the way in and out of the building. Just pop in my headphones and strut. People don't know what it is. They probably think I'm listening to Pooh Link or something, and it's like I'm not gonna say it's like because they're not gonna let me live it down. So who are you listening to? What
It's
are
such
you
a good
listening?
question. I'm a little bit of an old lady at heart. I think, and also I don't listen to too much when I'm actively writing because it gets in my ear and that's messy. Sometimes
Yeah.
if I'm doing research, like I've actually been researching 1930s blues, kind of in the Robert Johnson style for this
Ah,
project.
yeah.
But but when I'm not stressed about that, I really love Bill Evans. I love the 60s cool jazz artists. Bill Evans was Miles Davis's piano player.
Hmm.
I could listen to Bill Evans all day. There's a song of his called Peace, Peace, Peacepiece that I love. I do like some bossa nova
Yeah.
now and then. There, in terms of new artists, there's a South African singer I think is amazing called Zoe Modiga. I happened to hear her at this Africa salon in Harlem a couple years ago. She's super talented.
Hmm.
On my wall of my office, I do have a Nina Simone record and I have a
Oh,
Miriam Makeba record. Miriam
yeah.
Makeba, one of the
Yeah.
great South African
Hmm.
vocalists, seriously unbelievable.
Yeah.
But Zoe Modiga may be like a modern day heir to her. So I've been listening to her a little bit. There's also a really wonderful jazz vocalist. I may not even be saying her name right, called Cyril Aimee. I think she's half Dominican and half French, and her sound is gorgeous. She actually has a really beautiful Sondheim album
Hmm.
where she does all this kind of interpretive work with Stephen Sondheim's work. So she's super talented too.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks. I got some new
But
names to look
but I
into.
will say this is also why I like teaching voice because I always ask the students who are you listening to, and then I get a little more up to speed. Like okay, this is what everyone's listening to now.
You can get up with the times, huh?
That's right. I
Ah.
try.
All right. I'm going to be quiet now. I've talked longer than I want to because Dr. Asare has to stop right at 12:50 so that she can get to her next class. And our class ends at 12:52, so we should be fine. But does anybody have any questions? I have some more that I could ask and want to ask, but I want to open it up before we get too late. Any questions or comments or anything? Go ahead, Andy.
Hi, my name is Andy Rodriguez, and one thing that I was wondering is because you do music for a living and this is what you surround your life in, do you ever find sometimes that it's hard to separate like music being your passion and music being your work? Do you have like other hobbies that you'll do sometimes when you just need a break from music, or is that something that you don't really struggle with?
It's a good question. I find I struggle with that a little bit more around the theater side. Like I actually watch a lot of international TV because I just can't deal with like, I just need like to be in a different headspace and the kinds of stories I'm always dealing with. I think yeah, I mean I think there's always that line between am I doing something for money or am I doing it for love? I mean, listen, I really think that money and the way we understand money in this country, I'm going to try not to get too political, can skew our understanding a little bit, right? So that we may think that something only has value if we're making money from it, or it just messes with the calculus of why things are important. And some of the things that matter the most to me musically, I've never made any money from, and I never will. And so I think just kind of being able to keep clear for myself where my center of gravity of value is in relation to these different kind of things. I think that's actually the this feels muddy, but that might be the clearest answer I can give.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for the question, Andy. Anyone else? You may have to come unmute because, oh, Luna, there you go.
Hi. I wanted to ask, like, personally, what was the most like important project you work on, whether it just gave meaning or maybe it was like the outcome of it, or maybe it was like the way that you were able to affect someone's life with it.
Thank you. I think all the shows are like children, right? It's one cannot pick one's favorite. We love all of our children equally. I wrote a play for this is not music, but I wrote a play for Marvel a couple years ago that gets done at a lot of high schools, and it's about Marvel's first Muslim superhero, Kamala Khan. Actually, it's pronounced differently from Kamala Harris, and I keep getting screwed up. Her name is actually pronounced Kamala Khan, Ms. Marvel, and that gets done at a lot of high schools, and that really moves me. I even think I got a piece of fan, like what like a diehard comics fan wrote me about that play, and that was really meaningful. So when things go on and they have their life, my Secret Agent musical Sympathy Jones also gets a lot of high school and regional productions, and
Wow.
it's really fun to see that living. I think the piece that I have a semi autobiographical musical called The Family Resemblance that I usually say is about a family a lot like mine with a white mom, a black West African dad, and two mixed race kids. In the show, they're daughters, and in real life, I have a brother, and he's always kind of like, "Why'd you write me out of the show?" But that piece was really hard for me to write. It's not straight autobiographical, but it's draws on a lot of my own feelings and experiences, and it was hard for me to come to it. So that one is very close to me. It uses a lot of West African music. There's an African percussion ensemble at the beginning that the actors play, and so rehearsing that is always really exciting. I studied in West Africa for a while to be able to do that, and for some reason that musical it's about one daughter who's trying to find out who she is within her family. Like she feels very different from all the other family members, and for some reason, I don't really understand how these things work, but people are often very moved. Like a lot of people are often crying at the end of that show. And that, I guess, when I see people really having a genuine response to something that I've written, that means a lot.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that, Masi. Anyone else? Just you can raise your hand or just come on mute. I'm scrolling through here. Uh, okay, good. So, Masi, in these last 3 minutes here, this is going to be a tough question.
Oh
So,
God. Now this is a tough. These are
I
all
know,
so
right?
tough.
I'm going to make you think about this because it's actually going to require you to talk about you in a way that sometimes we don't always do or allow ourselves to. But what is
Mhm.
something you are really proud of yourself about right now?
You're right. This is the hardest question. I kind of was not sure what to say about this. Right now, what am I proudest of myself right now? I think, to be honest, and we all should be proud of this. I'm proud that I have come this far in this pandemic. This has been emotionally challenging. I always think it's important to talk about mental health. I think it's the real struggle of our time. I'm really grateful that I'm able to sit here at my piano and I'm able to sing with my students. I think the thing I'm proudest of is just keeping going, which in the end is what it all is anyway. It isn't you're never done. It's just how am I going to sing the next note? How am I going to find the next musical phrase? And so I think that's probably what I'm proudest of right now. If you ask me like across my life, I might have said the Family Resemblance show.
Hmm.
I do remember the first time I got in the mail the printed piano vocal score of Sympathy Jones with like
Yeah.
24. I don't even remember how many musical numbers, maybe 24 musical numbers. Fully, beautifully laid out and engraved. I may have cried. So I do remember that being also a moving moment. But I really think, as you've phrased your question, what am I proudest of right now? I'm just proud that I'm here. I'm ready to warm up my voice after this and teach my next vocal performance class, just
Wow.
to stay in it.
Wow, thank you so much, Masi. I'm so proud of you. I'm proud to know you. I'm glad that we can be friends. And every time we talk, I'm always so grateful to learn something new And I just want to say how much I really, really appreciate you for taking time out of your day to be with us and sharing so deeply about you and the work that you get to do. And I just want to say thank you, everybody. Will you give a round of applause in the screen and
Oh, it's my
for Saudi
pleasure to
for her
be
time.
here.
Thank you so
It's my
much.
pleasure.
I
And I
really,
just want to
really
say
appreciate
that you all are very lucky to be sitting with Dr. Fox. He's brilliant musically and as a human. So I hope that you treasure your time
it.
with him.
Oh,
It was an
thank
honor to be here.
you. Thank you. I
Thank you
didn't pay her
all.
to say that, by the way. Thank you, Masi. I appreciate it. Have a great rest of your day. Thanks, everybody.